Hi, I'm Megan.
And I'm Alex.
And this is the Earth Inspired Podcast.
Today we're interviewing Megan Fink, the Education Director at the Annapolis Maritime Museum and former Student Leadership Coordinator for the Chesapeake Bay Foundation.
What is Chesapeake Bay Foundation?
So the Chesapeake Bay Foundation is the biggest regional nonprofit dedicated solely to saving the Chesapeake Bay. And what really makes us unique is that we have an entire education department that helps us do that. There's all different kinds of nonprofits that focus on the advocacy, that focus on the restoration, and CBF does that too. We have people coming in to testify and share their story with their local representatives. We have people planting trees and planting oysters, but we also have a huge branch of the organization dedicated solely to environmental education. And we really believe that that's the best long-term solution to saving the Chesapeake Bay, is to educate that next generation and make sure that they love the resource and the beautiful bay as much as we do.
What specifically did you do within that?
So I ran, as Megan mentioned, the student leadership program for the state of Maryland. So my job was to engage with high school students all throughout the state and provide them with those field experiences, those overnight experiences, paddling, camping, hiking, visiting farms, exploring all the different beautiful aspects that make up our watershed, understanding the science, understanding how those ecosystems work and function in relation to our society, and then preparing those students to come and testify, to advocate. So it was really an advocacy-driven program, but of course with all the fun outdoor education experiences that are needed to really make an impressive advocate and someone who can speak to the issues from personal experiences.
And so you mainly ran the student leadership program, right?
I worked for the Bay Foundation for 10 years. The last 4.5, I ran the Maryland Student Leadership Program. But when I first started, I started as a volunteer and then an intern. I can't recommend that enough to people wanting to get into the field. Volunteer with organizations you like. Be an intern, get those experiences that you need, and then I was hired full-time to work at our island environmental education centers. So these are programs that take students, teachers, principals for 3 days at a time to these remote marshy islands in the middle of the Chesapeake Bay, and really tie in not just the Bay science, but the Bay history and culture that make up this region, really highlight that human connection and interaction with the resource to these student groups. So it's not all about the data and the science. It's also, in our blood, in our veins, this connection to the Bay. People from Maryland and Virginia that have lived along the shores for hundreds of years, and really the indigenous people that lived here for tens of thousands of years before, centering their story and voices in this big picture. The Bay has been here for 30,000 years now, and we hope it's here for another 30,000, and we need to share all the different experiences that have happened in and around its formation and its contributions to our culture and society.
How was the adjustment period moving out to the islands for a couple days?
That was a crazy experience. It's very remote. You're working there with another environmental educator, and you're having, every few days groups of students of all ages, from sixth graders to college kids. And then maybe next week I would just be working with a group of principals. So really, the best time about being on the islands is when the groups would leave and you'd have more than a day to kind of regroup and not just take care of the center and take care of all your job responsibilities, but time to really enjoy the place where we live. So we would hop in our little skiff or in canoes with our coworkers, and we would paddle to other marshy, beachy islands, and we would go progging, which is a colloquialism here in Maryland, specific to Smith Island and Tangier Island, Virginia. And it just means beachcombing, progging. It's Old English for to poke or to prod, and it's about exploring the edges where water and land meet and seeing what's being eroded, seeing what's being uncovered. It's like a time capsule. So we were really, as a team of environmental education nerds, we're very excited to go out and explore the ecosystems that we lived in, that we taught about, and to find those treasures and to find arrowheads and old glass bottles and old clay pipe stems, and then also a lot of trash, and clean up the beaches and the places that we live and start to kind of notice, which plastics are showing up more frequently. I have to admit, I now, after living on the islands, I hate balloons. I think they are just the worst, and we see them all the time out in the Bay, and so I'm the party pooper who never wants to have balloons around. But yeah, it was definitely a transition. If you are a a social person like I was right out of college, extrovert, to come to these remote marshy islands in the middle of the bay and to have it just be you and the water and the sky and the birds that come to visit and say hello. Maybe stingrays are circling the Fox Island Lodge at night, and you're woken up by a splash and you get to go out and see some kind of, just magical seasonal animal migration. It was a very special place to live and hone my my knowledge of the natural world, and to be that in tune with where the sun is coming up on the horizon each morning, and to know where it's going to set before it happens, to know when the little white butterfly appears at the end of summer, that's the end of the peeler run. The soft crabs are starting to harden their shells. They're not molting as frequently. In early spring, when the hydrangeas, they call them the snowball bushes on the islands, when they start to bloom, that's the sign that the crabs are starting to molt and become soft crabs again. So I will never forget or appreciate more my in-tuneness and deep connection with the seasons and with what's blooming and what that means for life on the water for a waterman or for someone who lives that close to the bay. It was a very special time in my life. So that's where I started my environmental education career, was at these beautiful island centers.
So I know Alex went on a couple of the CBF camps. I also went to Smith Island in sophomore year. And I think we both agree that the bay is a really beautiful place, and it was a very special part of our experience, because going to Smith Island was actually one of our inspirations for this project. So I think it was really cool. And what was your experiences with the student leadership program?
So I was gonna say, especially when you were talking about Fox Island, that specifically was one of my favorites, because for anyone that doesn't know, Fox Island is literally on the water. It's on stilts. There's a little tiny island that's still there, that's connected to it by I guess the dock.
A long dock, yeah.
Yeah, a long dock. But the actual house that we stayed at itself was just on stilts in the water. I remember John was fishing one night out of his window, and he caught an eel, and I ran into his room, and there's just an eel on his bed. It's right out there. I thought that's one of my favorite memories from all of it.
Where else in the world can you fish out of your bedroom window?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then the amount of stingrays that we found on random days, just
we
fishing right
pulled one
outside.
in. I remember in our seine net, we were combing through the underwater grass beds and caught puffer fish and all this cool underwater life. And we didn't mean to, but we caught a cow-nose ray and pulled him or her on board to say hello. That was an exciting afternoon on the boat. Yeah.
It's just, I've never had any experience like that. And I think it's so valuable for kids, especially to have that opportunity, because where else are they going to be able to do that? We live in such a unique place in the world, in Maryland, right on the bay. It's kind of sad that not everyone is able to take advantage of that and get out there.
So you said you started at CBF as an intern. When you were a kid, did you know that this was what you wanted to do? Or did you have a kind of experience where you got involved in one of these programs later and then were this is had an epiphany, or this is what I want to do for the rest of my life?
That's a great question. I've always loved animals. That was kind of my entry point to the natural world. I thought, all the furry creatures, I even, fish, lizards, I was always outside exploring, trying to find what other things were living around me, what other creatures existed. So in my mind, I was going to be a vet or a wildlife rehabilitator. That was kind of the path I saw myself going down. I come from a family of teachers. My mom taught kindergarten through second grade, hearing impaired. My dad is a social worker, works with kids. My aunts and uncle, I've come from, so many people in my life work with youth and with children. And so I, like any headstrong teenager and going off to college, was determined to do something completely different. I was like, nope, wildlife rehab, I'm gonna be a scientist. So I went into the field of wildlife science and biology. In my senior year, I took a service learning course in environmental ed, and it kind of all just clicked. I was like, oh, I am gonna be a teacher, just not in the classroom. I'm gonna teach environmental education. I'm gonna teach little kids like me who were really curious about what creatures lived in the world around them, about those creatures. So moral of the story is, I hate to break it to you, we all become our parents. And I am definitely a version of them in this field. It is funny, I've taken them to the island centers, and it's not my mom's comfort zone. I remember holding up a fish and being like, Mom, isn't this the cutest thing in the world? And her looking at my dad saying, she gets this from you. Like, I don't know where she gets this. But I do get my teaching chops from her in that desire to educate from her. So that's kind of how I ended up here, a combination of my own passion and interests and then really, yeah, what I was exposed to from my upbringing. I think, to Alex's point earlier, we're doing a disservice if not everyone is being showed the plethora of opportunities that exist in the environmental field to contribute. You don't have to be a nature nerd and to want to crawl through streams to get involved in protecting the environment. There are so many different avenues and pathways that can help, like communications and this podcast. Raising awareness is a great avenue. So that's kind of how I ended up here, and I feel very lucky to have landed where I am.
I think environmental education is like so important because me and Alex, we definitely would not have gone down this path or been involved with any of these types of things if we hadn't been exposed to some foundation like CBF or had the magnet program that we were in high school that was like centered around the environment. And I think now it does show that it really does create a chain event in like the rest of our lives, because now he's like an environmental science major, I'm like studying sustainability as my minor, and it's just still like a huge part of our life. It makes us really appreciate the world around us.
I very much agree. I had zero clue what I wanted to do in college until I started doing things like that. And I was like, you know what? Still not completely sure, but I want to do something with the environment. I want to have that be my impact. And so I have no clue what I would have done otherwise, but I'm very glad that I had the opportunity that I did.
You said you loved animals as a kid. Did you grow up around a lot of animals?
So I will say, you both have mentioned that through school, and I'm curious if through your families too, you were exposed to experiences outside in nature. And I feel very lucky that I grew up in Virginia Beach, Virginia. It's a great public school system, and we did have field trips that took us to those places. But I think for me personally, as a kid, where I fell in love with nature and the environment and the critters was at my uncle's farm in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. We used to go out there. That was where I first camped. It was like a safe place for us to go as a family and camp along the banks of the Shenandoah River, runs right through his farm. He raised cows. He had chickens and pigs and dogs running around. And of course, I went fishing on that river, canoe camping on that river, and all with my family. I have very distinct memories of running through rows of corn there and peeling back the husks and finding different colored corn husks in the fall, those beautiful red corns, and then you find a purple one, and that's magic because they're not as common. And then when I would peel those back, I'd also find, insects had made their home in there, and there was a spider's web or cluster, and started paying attention to the smaller things when I slowed down out there in the farm and really had time to be not a totally unsupervised child. It was, my parents were around, but to have those quiet moments as a kid, to be alone in nature, was, I think, also really important to my lifelong appreciation for it. And I don't think I understood it at the time, but what I've really come to find as an adult is it's those quiet moments in nature are so healing for our mental health, and our spirits, mind, body, and soul. Vitamin D, stepping out into the sunshine on a lunch break does a world of difference for your mood. And there's more and more science to show us this connection between good mental health and nature, and us. We're not separate from this system. We need this system. As much as, we think we need to take care of it, it takes care of us. And so I think I didn't realize it then, but I definitely realize it now, looking back on my experiences, camping, canoeing, fishing, running through the fields of corn, bottle feeding a baby cow, those really up close personal interactions with the natural world have been transformative for me. And I certainly credit my public school education and the environmental ed experiences I was given, but I'm also very grateful to have had a family who pursued that and exposed me to that. Even if it wasn't always their comfort zone, they thought it was important that their kids experience the night under the stars and disconnected from all the technology that has given us so much as well, and is critical to how we're going to move forward and continue to protect the environment. but it just that realization of how important it is to unplug and to get away from it all.
What you just said about unplugging, I think, is interesting because back on those islands, I know they always talk about being on island time. Can you explain what that is?
So island time is the best. It's really a mindfulness practice. I, again, didn't realize that's what I was teaching at the time, but I see it so clearly now. It's all about living in the present, living in the now. We're not worried about what time we're gonna have dinner, when we're gonna go to bed, or what time we're gonna get up in the morning. We're gonna let our intuition and Mother Nature guide us. So if it's raining and lightning, it might not be a good time for a boat ride. But if it's sunny and slick cam, really calm, that's a perfect time to go canoeing. And if the tide is low, that's when we wanna go progging and we wanna go beachcombing. So we're gonna use the natural cues around us to inform our agenda and what we're gonna do. And if we're hungry, we're gonna eat. And if we're tired, we're gonna take a moment to lie down in the marsh meadow and sit in the sunshine and just kind of using our own natural compass and intuition and nature's cues to inform how we run programs was a really freeing and I think innovative way to do environmental education, to really let nature sit in the driver's seat and form the agenda versus us trying to dictate that. And of course there are things, teachers are coming out, we wanna make sure that kids are coming back having tested water quality and they're gathering data because that informs a bigger picture and is something that they can do later to take action in their community. If they have strong data saying, hey, this local river's polluted, here are the things we can do. We obviously have academic metrics we want to achieve, but I think island time added a really beautiful layer of that mental health kind of component and understanding that lifelong skill of mindfulness and how important that is to us.
Nowadays, I feel like everybody is always rushing around and always worrying about the time. And so even in high school, that's such a big issue. I mean, they have the bells for like the exact times that you have to be at a specific place. And it's such a marked contrast to when you're on island time, when you're at these places where there's no worry in the world. It's just you do what you want to do when you want to do it. You're not having that stress of like daily life influencing every single action.
I remember when I went to Smith Island, I feel like I use my phone a lot in daily life, but those three or 2 days that we were on the island, I remember like not checking it at all, and I was just living in the moment, enjoying those sights, and also just enjoying how beautiful the bay is. But I also liked the fact that we got to learn all about the bay when we were there. I felt like it was a really educational experience because I knew about the bay. Like, I've lived in Maryland my whole life, so I knew the bay was here. Like, I've visited a lot. I used to go to Ocean City all the time. I've been like crabbing. Like, I never knew just how many states and like how many people and organisms the bay supported, and I felt like learning about it and getting to see all the little animals and stuff. Like, I remember holding a baby crab. Yeah. It was just so interesting, and it was so fun. And it's made me like think about the bay all the time. And like now I want to go back and visit Smith Island again.
I mean, you're going to Assateague in like a couple days.
Oh yeah, I'm going to Assateague like in 2 days.
That's gonna be a blast. Mm-hmm. Are you camping or?
No, we're not camping. We're staying in like an Airbnb overnight.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I went to Assateague maybe 2 years ago. And it was really pretty. I like the horses.
Yes. Yeah, that's a beautiful part of the world too. Assateague, Chincoteague Islands, those barrier islands, a little bit saltier than our Chesapeake Bay, more exposure to the ocean, but certainly another national treasure that we have on this side of the coast, yeah.
How have your experiences living on these islands or just participating in these CBF events change your perspectives on the environment or like environmental education, that kind of thing?
Where I am right now on that, I think a big part of what I did early in my environmental education career was to teach about individual responsibility. And it's deeply important to me and how I live my life. My partner and I, we try to hang up our laundry on the line when we can instead of use our dryer. We're very energy conscious and we try to never waste food. We're always planning around what's gonna go bad in our fridge next for creative meals in the kitchen. And so we take that individual footprint and that responsibility very seriously. And I think, everyone who lives on planet Earth should. That being said, and I think that's, those are great first steps that we should be teaching young people is what do you have control over, right, in your life? And that comes back to mindfulness too. It's like one step in front of the other. Climate change is a big looming thing that I don't have a lot of control over as an individual. So there are things I can do in my everyday life that make a difference, like reducing my plastic consumption, buying reused clothes and goods, cutting down my food waste, hanging up, all of those little things add up and matter. That being said, I think when the student leadership program really changed my perspective in adding that advocacy level, understanding that regulation and policy has to complement, it's gotta be grassroots, it's gotta be those individual actions and grass tops. It's gotta be our leaders and our big systems have to change too with us. Because we can't put all that responsibility on our individual shoulders. It's not fair, it's not realistic. We are not the problem. Humans are part, again, of nature, of this earthly system. And I just think the corporate social responsibility aspect of things, governance, international governance is really important. And it's not to throw your hands up and say, all right, well, it's out of my control, I can't do anything. We can do things. But I think I've really shifted my perspective in when I try to teach is to not the last thing I want to do is have kids feel like it's all on them and that they have to take all these individual actions, and if they're not recycling, then they're a bad person. There's no perfect environmentalist. No one is doing all of it right all of the time. It just is not possible. So I think holding corporations and big governance accountable, systems, that do have tons of fun, can influence, broad scale production. Stop. Why do we have so much plastic packaging and everything? There are better alternatives, and it's got to start, yes, in consumer choice, but the products have got to be available. And they've got to be affordable. We can't leave a segment of the population behind who can't afford to buy organic or to buy locally sourced meat. I mean, that's more expensive if that's the pathway you're going to take to try to reduce your impact. Yeah, I think the most important thing we should do is not shame one another. We should encourage each other, be each other's biggest cheerleaders, celebrate accomplishments wherever we can make them, and really hold the powers that be accountable and try to create systems change through regulation, policy, law. I think it's got to be both things happening at the same time. So I've kind of shifted from more of that micro scale and individual action to try to figure out collective action and include that in the environmental education story.
I completely agree, because there has to be some sort of balance between putting the blame on like big corporations and also like being accountable for yourself. Because if you think that the only reason that climate change is happening is because these big corporations are spewing a bunch of greenhouse gases, all the emissions are coming from them, then you'll just think there's like a doomsday coming, like you can't do anything to stop it. It's just all out of your hands. But if you make small changes in your life, like you can still make a difference, and it'll help your mental with thinking about climate change, because then it will be like it's actually something that we can fix if we try and we put all these corporations accountable, but also put ourselves accountable.
It's a balance. It takes balance, yeah. I think that's a great point, Megan.
What is your biggest accomplishment that you're most proud of?
I think I have to say it's definitely the legacy that I left with the student leadership program. I worked on that program the longest, and the relationships I've built there have proven to last. I'm here with Alex, who I've known for several years now, doing this interview, and I've kept in touch with many of the students I've worked with, written countless recommendation letters for them, and I could not be more proud of the work that they've gone off to do. And if I have been any part of inspiring that or encouraging that, fostering that, that's got to be the proudest accomplishment. And I'll say I'm also very proud that I was brave enough to leave the Bay Foundation, because I do no longer work there now, and I worked there for 10 years. It is an amazing community of individuals to work for, and I think the student leaders and that program really did give me the courage to keep growing and push to go on and do more, and to try something new, and to take my own advice that I've been giving to them for for many years. So yeah, very proud of that impact and my relationship building with my students and through that work. And then very thankful to them for giving me the courage to move on and know that the program's going to be okay without me, because I've left another group of stellar students there for the next student leadership coordinator to foster and take on epic adventures and provide with really cool opportunities. I feel like I've left that program in a really good place, and I'm excited to kind of work now with the Annapolis Maritime Museum and build their education programs. They have great education programs in place, and I know they're interested in incorporating more climate change education. And if I can help them do that, that will be another crowning achievement for me personally.
What is your role within the Maritime Museum now?
So I started here in January as their education director. I manage a team of 4 awesome environmental educators. We do work, primarily our audience is pre-K, so really little humans, very different than high school. Pre-K through about 6th grade, so a different niche than the Bay Foundation. I'm hoping that, we can be a funnel and a feeder of future student leaders, that maybe, the students who come through the Annapolis Maritime education programs will also then go on to be Bay Foundation student leaders, so that, to y'all's point of, that early childhood education, environmental ed, if they could have that connection to then leadership after this foundational kind of exposure through AMM, to then go to CBF and take on more advocacy and leadership, that would be so cool. But yeah, education director for the Maritime Museum. We run tons of field trips. We are in the middle of launching our oyster education program, which reaches 6 different middle schools in Anne Arundel County. We're going to go out on our skipjack. We're going to learn all about oyster harvesting. They've had a chance to dissect an oyster in the classroom already. They've interviewed a local waterman. So again, painting that bigger picture, just like the island education programs, not just the science, but the culture and the art and the economic engine that oysters provide. So really, trying to give kids that big picture that all of these subjects they're learning about in school are interconnected. So that's where we are right now. I'm still in learning mode. 2 months in, very new, but excited to see where we go. We're gearing up for summer camps. We run summer camps too. Again, more for the younger kiddos than high school students. But yeah, just excited to continue to share that Bay magic. Get them out on kayaks, get them out on the skipjack, test some water quality, build some oyster models, do some different scientific experiments on buoyancy, really have them understand all the Bay ecology and then the history and the maritime heritage that is so important to this series of peninsulas that I live on here in Anne Arundel County.
Can you tell us a little bit about this location, being right by the water, and how it factors into your education?
Yes, so we are on Back Creek right now. The Maritime Museum has 2 campuses. The Education Center operates out of Ellen O'Moyer Park. We are in a city park right now, surrounded by 2 marinas on Back Creek. We have a little cove right here, so we'll go seining. We'll wade into the water with nets with kiddos and do biodiversity samples. We also have 12 acres of maritime forest and a mile walking loop trail to take our students on to explore. Again, kind of identifying native, non-native species, talking about what an invasive species is and why that would be a problem. And again, just addressing and assessing the biodiversity of the ecosystems we have right here at the Ellen O'Moyer City Park campus. The Maritime Museum proper itself that, has exhibits and you can go visit, I highly recommend it. They were all we just did a huge renovation in April 2021. So all new exhibits, a lot of cool technology incorporated throughout to help tell the story. We do sometimes run field trips over there. There's another beautiful beach where we can seine in. It's also located on Back Creek, and that museum has a really cool history. It's in the old McNasby's oyster cannery. So it used to be where all the oyster buy boats throughout the bay would come drop off their oysters to be processed, shucked, cleaned, put into cans, and distributed throughout the country. So we've taken that old shell of an industrial cannery and we've turned it into a museum, and we have some offices over there. We just hosted a big oyster roast and sock burning celebration this weekend. We're hoping spring is here, so I guess this is a funny Annapolis tradition that I never knew about till I lived here, but I guess everyone burns their socks to welcome spring. It's like, no, boat shoes and flip-flops from here on out. No more socks and sneakers. Spring is here. kind of last chance to slurp down those fresh wild caught oysters and celebrate the coming of spring. So yeah, 2 beautiful campuses, Back Creek, Annapolis. And that water access, yeah, to Megan's point, allows us to do a lot of on-the-water education, really hands-on, immersive experiences.
I'm guessing it's amazing to work here because I'm sure some of the sound has gone through, but we are outside right now. We're like basically right on the water, and I love just being able to like look out behind you and like see all the views and all of that.
The whole time we were driving here, Alex was like, I'm so excited to see the water. I want to live here.
No, I would love to live here one day when I'm older.
And I will say, thinking back to mindfulness and time in nature, this is working water. So you might be hearing on this podcast noise in the background of hammers and of cars passing and boat traffic and dock work happening. Because as much as, again, we want to teach young people about the natural world, I think it's important that we don't describe it in a way that, again, makes it seem pristine and separate from us and that we just make it worse, because that's not true. We also have an obligation and have figured out ways in the last 50 years, and we're getting better and better at this kind of culture of reciprocity, where we do use the water. It is part of our culture and our society and our economic engine. And because the waterways give us all that, it's our responsibility to take care and to give back even more. So not just sustainability, to sustain the existing status quo, but to really restore and that reciprocity, to return the favor to Mother Nature. So I think it's really important that kids, not just see this beautiful Back Creek and this cove as something separate from, but that they see there are people out here paddling and boating and enjoying the resource. I know recreation in this area brings in millions of dollars every year to fund restoration work and to keep conservation movements going. So yeah, just striking that balance for young people, letting them see the water, be a part of it, but know that they can, we can go in and splash in and play in it. Taking care of it doesn't mean that we just quarantine it off and let it be on its own. Forever humans have managed natural landscapes and done so in ways that have been productive and fruitful for both parties involved, for Mother Nature and society. And we've clearly seen examples throughout history where we've tipped the scale in the opposite direction and we've over-extracted and over-harvested and overused. But showing kids both sides of that story, and to Megan's point earlier, not all the gloom and doom that sometimes surrounds the environmental movement, but the success stories and the hope, and that we can still work the water. We can regenerate soil health and forests and water quality while still enjoying the resource. Yeah, great place to come to work every day.
To end it off, what's your favorite memory of being in nature so far? It could be like with CBF, on your own. I know it's like a really hard question.
I have to say it's the quiet moments. And I am always with people, but we're together and we're quiet together and we're listening together. What immediately pops into mind is, sadly not in the big watershed, but I went a few winters ago in the before the pandemic, to visit my cousins in Bozeman. And I had never been to Yellowstone. And we went in and we went to the boiling river in the middle of winter. And so we're wading in, there's snow on the ground, into the river is hot, sometimes too hot, depending on where you step. But we found this little hot spring, this little secluded spot that it wasn't too hot. And there's like snow on the rocks around us. We're in bathing suits in the water. It's kind of a confusing thing for the mind, I think, to process being that cold and then sitting in boiling hot water. But my cousin said, I was there with my brother and 2 of my cousins, and he was like, can we all just, sit here for a minute or 2 and just listen and just be together in this beautiful place in this moment? And I've replicated that experience a few times for my friends when we're in the marshes or we're on a beach, and it's like, let's just all sit here and see how long we can be quiet together. And there is something magic that happens between humans in that moment. Sitting outside in a beautiful setting, just being just being and appreciating. When I think of my favorite nature experiences, and there's some raucous ones too, but we'll stick with the mindfulness theme.
I remember on some of the field trips that we did back in high school, and even on some of the trips that we did like this, and most of them I think there's at some point where we would just take a couple of minutes and like lay down, look at the stars, look at the moon, and just be quiet and be with nature. And I think that's very much an underrated part of the experience.
Yeah, it was always like we would go on a night hike or we would get up and see the sunrise. And I remember no one would tell us to be quiet, but everyone would just be in such awe of the landscape that we would all just sit in silence and just enjoy.
These are powerful moments.